Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, distinguished speakers, participants, and our allies. It is a great honor and privilege for me to welcome you to this critical event titled Advancing Gender Justice and Accountability for Women of Afghanistan. And I sincerely appreciate our co-organizers, Global Human Rights Defense, and Forum Asia, and as well as our esteemed co-sponsors who have not only supported this event, but have taken a clear and principled stand in solidarity with the women of Afghanistan. The permanent missions of Switzerland, Canada, the European Union, Finland, the United Kingdom, Luxembourg, Chile, Belgium, Iceland, and as well as our civil society partners, including WPHF, ICJ, OMCT, Independent Diplomat, and Center for Human Rights Advocacy, all contributed to making this gathering happen. Your support brings weight, credibility, and visibility to our advocacy efforts at a time when silence risks turning into complicity. We are honored to have such widespread support and global solidarity. It sends a powerful, unified message that Afghan women are not alone in their fights for justice, equality, dignity, freedom, and basic human rights. 4 years have been passed since the government collapsed, yet Afghanistan continues to face profound human rights crisis, particularly affecting women and girls. Recent development, including the arbitrary arrest of young women and girls from public spaces under the pretext of so-called bad hijab, restrictions on education, and barriers to employment, highlighting the urgent need for action. Before we begin, I just would like to emphasize that this discussion is not just about highlighting the current crisis, but about solutions and action. Afghan women and girls have already proven their resilience. But what they need now is sustained global support and to reclaim their rights to education, work, and public participation. I would also like to welcome the 7 Afghan women human rights defenders, which have traveled to Geneva for advocacy efforts. Happy to have them here as well. With that, I would like to invite Her Excellency Patricia McGulloch, Deputy Permanent Representative of Canada to the United Nations in Geneva, to open the session. Over to you, Excellency.
Soraya, and good afternoon to all here today, esteemed colleagues and distinguished guests. It is a profound honor to join you at this vital meeting and gathering of Afghan civil society and human rights defenders from around the world. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge the extraordinary courage, strength, and resilience of human rights defenders from around the world, but of those who continue to stand firm in the face of adversity, especially the women and girls of Afghanistan. It is their voices that must be elevated and centered in every conversation about the country's future. They have been and continue to be the backbone of resistance against the oppressive and egregious rule of the Taliban's de facto authorities. Since August 2021, the Taliban have systematically erased Afghan women from public life, continually announcing decrees that deprive women and girls of even their most basic human rights. The consequences are staggering. Around 23 million Afghans now depend on humanitarian aid, with women and girls disproportionately affected due to the restrictions on their employment, movement, and education. Yet, in the face of brutality, Afghan women continue to raise their voices. They call for the reopening of schools, the restoration of their human rights, and meaningful international solidarity and action. Whether in exile or within Afghanistan, they lead community initiatives, advocate for inclusive and representative governance, and contribute to peace-building efforts. Their voices must be centered in decisions regarding the future of Afghanistan and continue to be so. Since the fall of Kabul, Canada has taken decisive action to support Afghan women and girls. And I'm very proud of that, I must say. Recognizing the urgency of the crisis, Canada has committed over $250 million in humanitarian aid, with an additional $133 million directed towards basic needs, health and education, and the empowerment of women and girls. Canada has also led one of the world's largest Afghan resettlement programs, welcoming more than 55,000 Afghans, including more than 23,000 admitted through humanitarian pathways, many of whom are women, formal lawmakers, civil society leaders, and human rights defenders. We are very proud to provide a place for these individuals to continue their advocacy for justice and accountability in safety. Beyond resettlement, Canada has actively supported human rights defenders in exile and has been consistent and unequivocal in our condemnation of the Taliban. In September 2024, following calls for accountability and justice from all of you in the room today, Canada partnered with Australia, with Germany, and the Netherlands to formally take steps to hold Afghanistan accountable for its violations of women's and girls' rights under the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. Victims and survivors deserve justice and reparations. Through forums such as the UN-led Doha process, Canada continues to advocate for the full reinstatement of women's rights and their meaningful participation in shaping Afghanistan's future. Canada is strongly committed to supporting human rights defenders and civil society groups, and we applaud the efforts of the Shahmama organization, who provide a platform that is essential for sustaining women-led advocacy. These spaces are not merely symbolic, they are strategic. They ensure that Afghan women's voices remain central in shaping international human rights and policy agendas. So while the road ahead is long, Canada remains unwavering in its commitment. We stand with the people of Afghanistan, especially Afghan women and girls, as they strive for a stable, secure, and peaceful future where no one lives in fear, inequality, and oppression. And in closing, I would just like to recognize the huge loss of life in Afghanistan over this past week as a result of the terrible earthquake. And I send condolences on behalf of my country, on behalf of Canada and the mission here, to the families and friends of the victims. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for your remarks. And now we are moving on to Ms. Raquel Garcia Hermida, Chair of the Delegation for Relations with Afghanistan at the European Union. She is joining us online. If the technical colleague let us know whether she is online or not. She is here. Thank you so much. Can you hear us? Okay, we need to have our headphones. Yeah. I think it is yours. No, it is yours.
Mine's
Yeah,
okay.
please. Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Yes, now we can clearly hear you. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Mrs. Atiti, and thank you so much to the organizing actors behind this event. Thank you for the invitation. It is a real pleasure to be joining your community this afternoon. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay for the rest of the session. I'm very sorry about that, but I need to run here in the European Parliament. I'm speaking to you from Brussels, from my office, where this week we started this week with the horrible news, of course, from the earthquake in eastern Afghanistan, and it is with deep sorrow that we have seen the victim count going up, and I am sure that for all the Afghans present online and offline in this meeting, that you will be affected directly or indirectly. So my deepest condolences also on behalf of the European Parliament and the Delegation for Relations with Afghanistan to you and all the people of Afghanistan. We're especially worried about this development and this crisis because the area is populated by also displaced Afghans, many of whom have just been expelled from Pakistan. That's also, the deportations is also a subject that we are following closely from the delegation here in the European Parliament. And we keep putting pressure as much as we can to ensure that deportations do not go on, particularly for vulnerable groups, such as, for example, of course, women and girls. I will come to that in a moment, but also for threatened journalists who had already been approved for resettlement schemes. But as we have heard today, there's a crackdown going on from the Pakistani authorities, and that's something that is concerning us very, very much at this moment. What we also see in the aftermath of this crisis of the earthquake is that the Taliban regime is falling victim to their own harsh laws at this moment, because the repressive regime and the laws and regulations that have been implemented in the last few years when it comes to women and girls, and particularly their access to labor market, health providers and to health care, is becoming it's making very, very difficult to provide the necessary assistance, which is, of course, horrible, because humanitarian assistance, also medical assistance, should be apolitical and should be possible to be carried on regardless of the gender and the political conviction of the government or the de facto authorities in this case. So that's something that the European Union is also monitoring closely. I have been in touch with the European Commission. I know that they are working with their partners on the ground. And of course, I'm very happy that the first help has been released. And I'm also calling for member states to do their parts. I think that the immediate priorities is, again, focusing on the most vulnerable women, girls, children, providing emergency healthcare, trauma care, protection, shelter, and early recovery for the hardest hit communities. I also know that the European Commission has opened up the possibility to use the Copernicus satellite system to aid rescue tasks, and that's something that I'm also happy about. And in this way, we see, or we try to put Europe's solidarity in action. I think that going back to the general picture and what we're trying to do from the European Parliament, I think that all of the present distinguished guests will know that the level of aid to Afghanistan has, of course, been enormously diminished and cut in recent years, and that this has horrible consequences for not only the humanitarian situation in the country, but also, of course, for the long-term perspectives. The Commission announced, the European Commission, I mean, my counterparts here in Brussels, announced on the 17th of June a package of 161 million euros for 2025, with over 141 million for operations inside Afghanistan and 10 million each for Afghan refugees in Pakistan and Iran. And this is being delivered via humanitarian partners alongside the EU humanitarian air bridge. It is, of course, of utmost importance that we help the people of Afghanistan on the ground, but we do not in any way legitimize the regime of the Taliban, de facto authorities of the country, and we don't give them an excuse to engage in a more high level of diplomatic contacts. The principled approach is something that we as European Union and also as European Parliament take very, very seriously. And because of all of these different developments at different levels, and also because of the recent crisis, in the next plenary session of the European Parliament in October, I am pushing for a debate so that we can take stock of the situation in the country 4 years after the fall of Kabul, that we take stock of the worsening situation for women and girls, and that we reinstate our commitment as European Parliament and hopefully as a European Union as a whole to keep working on a future where Afghanistan will be for all, and where participation of all groups within the Afghan society will be guaranteed, as well as continuing to call for increased support for the country affected by the victims of the earthquake. So that is an introduction. Again, I don't know how much longer I can stay, but it would be very helpful for us to know from the European Parliament to know what the most acute needs are, also preparing for the winter after the earthquake, and also what the main constraints are to delivering aid effectively to those who need it. So if there's any of the present guests who would like to develop on that, even though I'm not here, maybe we can have a contact after this session, or it could be sent to us in written form. Again, I appreciate this invitation very, very much. I want to again express the unwavering solidarity of the European Parliament with the Afghan people, and I hope that that you have a very productive session the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Now I would like to invite Mr. Richard Bennett. Mr. Bennett, in your role as the UN Special Rapporteur, you have been closely monitoring the human rights situation in Afghanistan. From your perspective, what immediate action by the international community are most critical to address the ongoing systematic violations on women's rights, including the recent arbitrary arrest of young women and girls from the streets, especially in Kabul and Ghazni provinces? Yeah, over to you, please.
Thank you, Soraya Jan. Good afternoon, Excellencies, delegates, colleagues, and fellow panelists. I'd really like to begin by thanking the organizers, Shahmama, supported by several co-sponsors, for convening this important conference on gender justice for Afghanistan. And thank you both to you, Patricia, and for Raquel's previous remarks, which have, I think, set the stage. And thanks to Canada and the European Parliament for standing with Afghan women. I'm also going to begin by mentioning the earthquake and my deepest condolences to those who lost loved ones, and my best wishes for the recovery of those who were hurt, and in fact all of the communities affected in Puna and Nangarhar provinces. I can see that there has been an immediate response internationally, as well as inside Afghanistan, and I'm in touch with different actors on the ground. Yesterday, I met with UN Women in Afghanistan who have got people in the area. I was struck this morning by what I thought was quite a significant picture online, where Qatar, I don't know if Qatar is in the room, but Qatar sent one of its most senior women officials, former minister Mariam Al-Misnad, as the leader of its delegation in solidarity with the victims of the earthquake. She's pictured at the airport meeting Taliban officials. So bravo to her, and bravo to Qatar for sending a senior woman to head their delegation and to force the Taliban to meet her. I've also been worried about the impact on women and girls and and whether they are able to access services, as has been mentioned already. So I was pleased to hear from UN Women that they're monitoring that issue and haven't seen, at least yesterday, great concerns. And I saw reported in the press today, quote, mobile health teams, including men and women, have been sent to the earthquake-hit areas in Kunar. We were very concerned because after the earthquake 2 years ago in Herat, there was a lot of concern that women were not able to receive the services from other women. I hope lessons have been learned this time. Now I better start my speech. I'd like to start by maybe posing some questions. I feel often we jump to answers and we haven't really thought enough about what the questions are first. My first is, are we clear about our end goal in striving, in what we are striving as human rights defenders to achieve in Afghanistan? We know very well what the Taliban sees as the future of Afghanistan and how determined they are to achieve their vision. I think we also, if I may say, have a vision, perhaps an Afghanistan at peace with itself and its neighbors, inclusive of all Afghans, respectful of human rights and the equality of all, including women and girls, all genders, as well as all marginalized and minority groups. But are we clear about the plan to get there? And what is the role of human rights in achieving the vision? Second question is, how are we ensuring that we maximize our resources, that we ensure effective collaboration and don't duplicate our efforts? And this question is especially critical at a time of drastic funding cuts, including to the important work of civil society organizations, humanitarian agencies, and others. I am concerned that the cuts, unfortunately, are probably not temporary. They illustrate a geopolitical shift that starts from the unraveling of the post-World War II international order that flows through increased spending on defense, particularly in the context of the war in Ukraine, and ends up with a severe impact on the most marginalized people in countries like Afghanistan. And the third question is, how can we ensure that in all discussions about Afghanistan's future, the people of Afghanistan in all their diversity, and especially women, are front and center? As you're all aware in this room, the human rights situation has deteriorated dramatically since the Taliban took control now more than 4 years ago. And nowhere can this be seen more than in the situation of women and girls. We're all aware that the Taliban have issued a litany of decrees and edicts which deprive women and girls of their fundamental rights, including freedoms of movement to education, work, healthcare, freedom of expression and association, access to justice, and participation in public life. In the last 4 years, not one of these decrees or edicts has been reversed. The Taliban's violation of the rights of women and girls are so severe, widespread, and systematic that I've concluded they constitute an attack on the civilian population that may amount to crimes against humanity, in particular gender persecution. And this year, the International Criminal Court has agreed with this analysis, and in July issued arrest warrants for the Taliban leader and another very senior official. But unfortunately, the Taliban's attack on the rights and dignity of women and girls is ongoing and intensifying. Last year, the de facto authorities enacted the so-called vice and virtue law. This further institutionalizes their system of gender persecution, but also targets the wider Afghan society, infringing upon the rights of minorities, severely restricting freedom of expression and press freedom, as well as cultural rights, among others. The Taliban system of gender oppression and persecution is taking place along these other serious and widespread violations, including the targeting of ethnic and religious minorities, in particular attacks on, discrimination against, pressure and marginalization of Shia Hazara, but also others who do not fit the Taliban's ideal type. There's been also an alarming increase in the use of corporal punishment, and I'm very concerned about killings and reprisal attacks against former government officials and members of the security forces. And meanwhile, human rights defenders inside the country, including activists, lawyers, and journalists, face arrest, detention, ill treatment, threats, intimidation, and harassment. These violations are being perpetrated against the backdrop of the humanitarian and economic crisis that has been referred to already, exacerbated by the mass returns of Afghans from neighboring countries, in particular Iran and Afghanistan, despite the very real risks of persecution, violence, and reprisals. And I concur with the previous speaker, who, if I heard her correctly, was calling for a halt or suspension of deportations from Pakistan in the wake of the earthquake. I have also done that on social media, as some of you may have seen, and along with other special procedures mandate holders, we made a statement to Pakistan last Friday on this very issue. These violations, let me be clear. There's a global responsibility to address the crisis in Afghanistan, and we are falling short. Not only, as I mentioned, do I suspect we do not have the answers, I'm not sure that we are even asking the right questions. However, one thing I am clear about is that accountability and justice are essential for realizing a vision that respects human rights. And it's important to define what we mean when we talk about accountability and gender justice. In my discussions and consultations with Afghans, both inside and outside the country, it's clear there are a number of components. One is criminal justice, investigation and prosecution of those responsible for international crimes, including those with superior or command responsibility. Another is truth-telling and acknowledgement of what's happened, which may include recognition of victims and memorialization. A third is reparations, including compensation and restitution, and the restoration of rights, especially to freedom of movement, education, work, and indeed access to food and water. These are often mentioned by Afghans as critical to justice. Safety and security are also essential and include the creation of an environment where people and their families can thrive. Another important component is the meaningful inclusion and representation of the people of Afghanistan in decisions about their futures and their lives. The bottom line, according to many women who speak to me and my team, is the restoration of human dignity for all Afghans, especially women and girls. And it's clear that whatever form of justice, it must be comprehensive and inclusive. We must not create hierarchies of survivors, those who are granted justice because they were violated by a particular actor or at a particular time, and those denied it because of a different perpetrator or time when the violation took place. I'm also firmly of the view that no single action will be effective on its own, which is why I'm advocating for an all-tools approach rooted in human rights and centering on the principles of justice, inclusion, equality, and non-discrimination. And this comprehensive approach must be embedded in a coherent theory of change. Because is the end goal only to punish some perpetrators, or is it broader, a holistic form of justice that contributes to a future that breaks cycles of violence and more? And first, we must I'll come to my recommendations. First, we must establish clear human rights benchmarks for engagement with the Taliban, making it clear there'll be no normalization of them unless there are demonstrable improvements in human rights, particularly for women and girls. Regrettably, this is easier said than done. Second, we need to ensure justice and accountability, as I've mentioned. It's crucial to send a strong message that there will be consequences for the Taliban's actions, and this can be achieved by utilizing and strengthening existing accountability mechanisms. There are ongoing investigations at the ICC, as I've mentioned, and an initiative under CEDAW which may come before the International Court of Justice. However, more is needed. And I will urge the Human Rights Council at the coming session to establish an independent international investigation mechanism. And I understand there will be further discussion about this by some of today's panelists. This mechanism would complement the work of the International Criminal Court, of my mandate, of UNAMA, and others. Another tool includes the codification of gender apartheid. Afghan men and women have since the 90s stated that this term best describes the lived realities and most fully captures the totality of the harms being inflicted upon them. There are ongoing efforts to codify gender apartheid in a proposed treaty on crimes against humanity, efforts I fully support. And fourth, we must press for increased funding for the humanitarian and human rights crisis in Afghanistan. If defense of donor countries, if their security is a concern, the most cost-effective and long-term form of defense is to build capacities in Afghanistan. The UN humanitarian response plan for 2025 had received just under 30% of the financial resources required to support those in need of assistance at the beginning of this month. I have to say that the Taliban and poverty are equally big problems in Afghanistan. My fifth recommendation is we must enhance support for Afghan women and girls and members of minority and marginalized groups. Within Afghanistan, this can include bolstering education opportunities, seeding and nurturing women's entrepreneurship, enhancing their protection. And outside the country, there's a need for increased support for refugee and exile communities, support for host and countries and communities in the neighborhood of Afghanistan, and a strict adherence to the principle of non-refoulement. And I call also for increased pathways to resettlement for those most at risk. Finally, and critically, we must embed human rights and women's voices in decision-making processes. Greater efforts are needed to ensure the equal, meaningful, and safe participation of women and members of minority and marginalized communities in discussions about accountability in Afghanistan. I want to finish by stressing the importance of keeping the situation in Afghanistan and the need for accountability meaningfully on the international agenda. The least that the international community can do is, as I've mentioned, at the coming session, establish an independent international investigation mechanism. I hope you find a way to do this, even if it may be difficult, because it's needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Special Rapporteur, for your remarks. Now I would like to invite Ms. Mario Essen, representative of Permanent Mission of Finland to the United Nations in Geneva, to deliver her statements from the floor. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and colleagues. I would also first like to start by sending our condolences to all the victims of the recent earthquake in Afghanistan and their families and friends. Finland is a proud co-sponsor of this conference, organized by Shahmama and many others. It is an honor to be a part of these discussions today to address the urgent and pressing issue of gender justice for the women of Afghanistan. Since the Taliban's return to power in August 2021, Afghan women and girls have faced systematic and brutal oppression. Their fundamental rights to education, employment, freedom of movement, and even their very voices have been silenced by violence and persecution. But despite these unimaginable challenges, Afghan women have not remained passive. They have continued to resist, to protest, and to speak out, often at great personal risk. They remain the beating heart of resistance within Afghanistan, and it is crucial that their voices are not only heard, but acted upon. Finland reiterates our full support to the courageous women and girls of Afghanistan. We would like to thank you for your work and availability to share your experiences with us. It is of utmost value to get first-hand information from you. The de facto authorities' institutionalized system of discrimination, segregation, and exclusion of women and girls in Afghanistan is completely unacceptable. The so-called morality laws only underscore the dark reality for women and girls and the entire Afghan society. The decisions taken by the Taliban go against Afghanistan's international commitments. The situation requires immediate action also from the international community. We need to use various avenues to seek justice for Afghan women and girls. Finland supports the broader international initiative led by Canada, Australia, the Netherlands, and Germany to hold the Taliban accountable for violating the CEDAW provisions. Despite severe limitations, the women and girls of Afghanistan, with immense strength and determination in innovative solutions, contribute as active agents to the well-being of the Afghan society and families. This deserves the full recognition of the global community. Finland is committed to supporting the Afghan people. In addition to humanitarian aid, Finland channels its support to the Afghan women by funding the promotion of their sexual and reproductive health and rights, emphasizing gender equality and the role of civil society. We are committed in keeping the situation on the agenda of the international community as long as needed. We are also here today to stand in solidarity with the Afghan women human rights defenders who have bravely documented atrocities, often at great personal cost, and who continue to fight for a future where Afghan women can once again live with dignity, safety, and freedom. We must recognize the essential roles women play in peace building, security, and international policymaking, and advocate for their full, equal, and meaningful participation in these processes. We must not rest until Afghan women are granted the rights and freedoms they are entitled to, and until their voices are heard and valued in every decision that affects their future. We are very much looking forward to the discussions today and to hear from the Afghan women themselves about their first-hand testimonies and experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Research fellow at the Center of Excellence for the Elimination of Violence Against Women at Monash University. Over to you, Dr. Palonda.
Thank you very much, Suraya. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies. I would like to first thank Shahmama organization for organizing this very important event, the member state, the sponsors. It means a lot to us to have a full room here and talk about Afghanistan, given the many crises that is unfolding in the world and which really needs your attention. So we really, really appreciate. I also want to acknowledge and pay my respect to my Afghan sisters who are present in this room. They are my friends, my colleagues. We talk, we laugh, and we cry, and have you here with our open wounds and trauma to come and talk about our country that we have lost and our rights. It means a lot to work together and be with each other. And I want to acknowledge your presence and how meaningful it is to the cause, and also acknowledge the victims of the recent earthquake in Afghanistan. We were really speechless. We heard about the difficulties of aid being reached. It's a system that is so difficult, and Afghanistan being one of the poorest countries in the Taliban. But the pictures that are emerging from the earthquake, I'm seeing the statistics shows that women and children are the most affected, but in the pictures, I rarely see any women and children. It is mostly men worker, men there, and women are completely invisible. As it's thousands of deaths, it is everybody's affected in Nangarhar, in Kunar, but those pictures, however devastated it is, it also shows to you that there is deep underground, even in earthquake, in a crisis like earthquake, women and girls and children are invisible, and that also means invisibility to the accessibility to aid, to support. I want to panelists before me have highlighted all the very important points. I want to take you to a story that I watched, a recent documentary that was showed in Australian ABC TV, which was aired in marking the 4th year of the Taliban rule. And the documentary was focused on 2 boys and 2 girls, aged around 10 years old, as a reflection of what it means to be human and to be children under the Taliban rule. The boys were sons of the Taliban officials. They were armed with plastic guns, which they enjoyed playing with and playing as bodyguards for their father. And they were saying that they aspire to become mujahid, which they describe as being a pure human. And then there were the girls who are the breadwinners for their families, headed by their widowed mothers. Their fathers were members of the Afghan National Army that have been killed or disappeared in the last 4 years. And the girls were polishing shoes on the streets of Kabul. They were very articulate and intelligent, as the girls are. And one became a YouTube star, interviewing other street children who are working on the street. At the end, they discussed that their biggest hope is to have a brother. The girls were saying that their biggest hope is to have a brother. They realized that they won't ever have a brother because they don't have a father. And this was very sobering to see that 4 years on, these are the children. I mean, Afghanistan is a very young population growing up under the Taliban rule. And in a traditional and patriarchal society as it is, on top of that, a systematically discriminatory regime that is in power, that divides between young children, is that between boys and girls, it could not be much more contrasting for us to see. And this reality is also reinforced by the data, which shows that gender gap in education, in employment, in health, all the indicators that sits under the Sustainable Development Goal, which UN is championing, that Afghanistan is becoming one of the largest. And I leave you with that story and with that thought that what the little girls of Afghanistan are going through, and what are they're facing, and what are their aspiration to do. So in a room like this, that we come together, we speak about everything. I think it is really their spirit and their soul that we have to think about a future, because we do not know how long the Taliban will last. It has been 4 years. The impact has been immense. For us being very far away, but for 7-8 of us in the room, we're daily in contact. We see a rise of suicide among young girls. We see, and these are all backed, even though with limited access to data or limited documentations that is happening. There's a rise of suicide among young girls inside Afghanistan. There are early marriages. Richard mentioned that poverty and Taliban rule are going hand in hand, are both harmful. But here it's also poverty and Taliban rule that are forcing and impacting the young girls and the women of Afghanistan, especially the younger one. In my talks with girls inside the country, they're saying that it is not just the Taliban that are wearing their white coats coming and after us and investigating us. It's also the shopkeeper, because we have to understand the Taliban's gender apartheid rule is so systematic that it has empowered men in every level from home, in the community, in the village. A taxi driver has a judgment about you, that what you're wearing, and based on that, the taxi driver will decide whether they will have you in the car or not. Your brother, your father will decide on whether you go out, on what you wear, and let alone everything else that institutionally you cannot go to school and everything else. So what we are hearing, that the impact of this is in the homes, in the communities. The 20 years of interventions in Afghanistan and the progress that we have made towards securing rights and sort of the change that was happening in the country is being reversed so dramatically, because there were a generation of young girls and women who really, really sacrificed in their homes and communities and fought through to go to school. And now these very father and brother and uncle and community members are turning against them. And we have to see the impact of gender apartheid 4 years on. What is it like, and how mentality has changed? Unfortunately, there's a rise of extremism in Afghanistan, and this is dangerous not only for Afghanistan but for the region. And because of that, we see a lot of engagement by the region, and also the internet, that it could impact the international community. So given the whole context, I think, and considering the Afghanistan's very, very young generation and uncertainty about the future, and imagine yourself being a girl in a village in Afghanistan, or a girl who have graduated from year 12, or there are girls who were just a month or 2 months away before getting their medical degrees or their other degrees. And what is life like for them, and what are we really practically doing? I'm very grateful for the support that we have received from Canada, from other member states who are present here in the European Union. But I think we are really in an urgent situation that we need to really address and go to concrete practical support. There are no universities that I know who offers scholarship for students from Afghanistan, men or women. And the girls do say that the school door has closed for us inside Afghanistan, and they have also been closed for us in the world. we hear a lot of nice things, we hear a lot of good statements, but what has really materially practical support the world has offered? Evacuation that was happening, it was based on the mission, people who really worked with these countries who were evacuated. And of course, we are grateful so many other human rights defenders got out, but we have left behind a massive grassroots human rights defenders, and by that the women and girls who does not have any way to get out of this situation. I mean, we are not asking for any military intervention, we're not asking for any other kind of things politically that is not possible in this current world. But again, Afghanistan is the only country that girls beyond the age of 12 cannot go to school. How many universities and schools and colleges have opened their doors? I know one in Rwanda that has hosted Afghan boarding school. Rwanda, Albania, one of very poor countries, they were the one who really targeted education and focused on girls and evacuated them. And also still there are visa processing. But what about our European friends? And this is something we can all do, just like we did for Ukraine. I think this is really, really important, and it will send a very strong message, a message of hope for the girls of Afghanistan. And these girls, I assure you, they are going to meet all the prerequisites that you have for this university entrances, as long as that there is a program for Afghanistan. But unfortunately, after 2021, everything was blocked, that no, we don't have embassy. But as Afghans, I mean, we have been at war for 45 years. We know how to navigate our way. Families are taking their daughters to the region to take them to do the interviews, go to the embassies. I mean, practically, it's very possible, but we just need that very concrete initiative from member state. And any country that leads that will be really, really leading the way for other countries to follow. I will not repeat, but I just want to say a couple of things about what we can do. I think amplifying the voice of Afghan women is really, really important. The 20 years intervention, and also within the very devastation that it had for Afghanistan and people of Afghanistan, the women have really thrived, and we have a transnational network of Afghan women. Women in Afghanistan are the only front against the Taliban right now. Even though there's so many political parties, there was like, we were the Mujahideens who fought against the Russians and did this to the Americans. But today, which was all men, today the women are on the front line fighting against the Taliban. And it's really important that we really amplify the voices of Afghan women at any platform, at anywhere. Have us there, include us there, no matter who, which, where, but we are diverse women from all parts of Afghanistan. Any woman come and tells you about her village, her home is a critical one that can really shape what you can do and how effective your support would be. Secondly, I want to emphasize on the diplomatic engagement. Do you know, I mean, my track is until 2023. There has been over 2,000 diplomatic engagement with the Taliban so far. This includes European Union countries, and I mean, mostly in the region, but beyond. And out of all of this, very limited were conditional that was on the human rights bench, as Richard mentions, which was really important. And this diplomatic engagement with the Taliban were without conditionality. And we always saw, I mean, grateful to Qatar to send a woman lead of the delegation to be there. But normally we see a lot of Europeans going to Kabul as member of the delegation, and they're all men meeting with men. Where is woman in this? I mean, Afghan women cannot go, but how do you, diplomacy is a very strong tool, and these countries should really, really play. I know diplomacy is about dialogue, diplomacy is about making changes, but 4 years on and 30 years of the Taliban being as an actor, we understand who they are and how they act. So we cannot just tell ourselves that we are just doing this for them to change. So putting pressure by putting women at the front line of your diplomacy is really, really important, and also putting condition in your diplomacy that it has to have some aspect of human rights in those diplomatic engagement. And diaspora diplomacy, Afghans are everywhere in the world, and I think things that we are doing today is really, really important for us, and also for you to to get to know, and I think it should continue. And fourth and last, I think that the practical and material support is really important. Politically, every country might feel like Afghanistan, we did there, we cannot do much, but you can do practical support, material support. And please come up and tell me one program that you're doing that is directly helping Afghan women and girls. And it's not political, it's not through the UN or so. There's so many Afghan civil society that you could target, you could work with, and that will go far and beyond to reach the people, and this will be much more effective for us. So I will end there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Farkhunda, for your strong insights. And thank you to our esteemed keynote speakers for their thoughtful and powerful remarks. As we transition to our first panel, I would like to invite the moderator of first panel, Ms. Mehranges, and the panelists to start the session, please. The first panel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, I can take it. So I think
Good afternoon, Excellencies and colleagues. On behalf of the Global Human Rights Defense, I would like to welcome you all to panel 1. This will be about documentation and accountability for gender-based violations. This panel will explore evidence collection, reporting mechanisms, and the role of international justice systems in ensuring accountability for gender-based violations in Afghanistan. We are privileged to have 3 panelists today with us, each bringing deep expertise and perspectives on this crucial matter. Our first speaker is Ms. Raquel Saavedra, an international legal advisor on global accountability at the International Commission of Jurists. Our second speaker is Ms. Farishta Abosi, who is a researcher at Human Rights Watch. And lastly, our third speaker is Ms. Sanga Siddiqui, a lawyer with extensive experience working on women's rights and justice. I would like to give the floor to Ms. Saavedra. Could you share with us how international justice systems can play a role in ensuring accountability for gender-based violations in Afghanistan, and what challenges remain in making these mechanisms effective?
Hi, thank you. And of course, I want to start this with thanking all of the organizers of this event, including Shahmama, and as well as co-sponsoring civil society and states, but most of all to the Afghan women and girls and all of the supporters within Afghanistan who make this work go far in ensuring that there is justice and accountability. So today I want to, of course, speak about documentation, reporting, and accountability, and I want to not frame these as three separate issues, but as one continuous pathway. Every testimony given, every document recorded, it's not only a record of harm, but also a potential piece of evidence. This evidence not only goes toward justice in the traditional sense, or criminal justice as we often think about it, but also going back to what Richard Bennett was saying in the first session, it also goes toward things such as truth-telling, putting down a historical record so that we don't repeat the past. All of these things require certain standards and procedures, and those who are documenting require that they have enough support to be doing this work to ensure that these testimonies serve that purpose. So the challenge before us now, how can we ensure we preserve it with care and ensure that it moves ability? But this is also the most fragile. Afghan civil society, women and girls are at the front line of documentation, as was stated in the intro remarks. And despite this tremendous risk to their personal safety and their loved ones, this is where states must come in to support these efforts. Of course, people who are documenting right now are facing not only the risks traditionally, but also the increased risks of reduced support which goes to not only ensuring that standards and procedures are put into place for adequate documentation, but also to ensure, of course, safety of themselves and those survivors that they're working with. So for documentation to serve justice, it has to meet certain standards. That means that documentation must maintain a clear chain of custody so that later information is not used to challenge that information, or it's brought to be somewhat unreliable. It also means cooperation. So going back to this question that Richard Bennett brought up about non-duplication, of course, we want to make sure that we are not duplicating efforts, because not only does that affect the reliability of certain aspects of evidence, also, we need to ensure that we're adequately documenting different aspects of events, because that supports cooperation. So this means conducting interviews in ways that are trauma-informed and gender-sensitive, of course, but it also means that civil society and documenters, along with other stakeholders who are doing this work, must somehow organize and ensure that they are dividing the labor amongst themselves, given how labor-intensive this work is. Of course, we know the complexity with documenting for the Afghan context. Not only are victims and witnesses spread across tremendous territory, borders across the world, but also where the human rights violations are taking place and the evidence surrounding those human rights violations, often this is nearly inaccessible. Those who are documenting inside Afghanistan obviously face reprisals and worse. So it's quite challenging. Plus, we're operating in a digital security environment where displaced Afghans who are even outside of Afghanistan who are documenting are still surveilled, not only to being subject to the risk, for example, of being sent back, or, contrary to the right to not be subject to refoulement. So, of course, these are all interlocking challenges that civil society and documenters are facing at this current moment in time. And it is the responsibility of the international community to ensure that, of course, again, the support is going to civil society to continue this work, and not only continue the work, but continue it in such a manner that it can take into account these various aspects: cooperation, preservation, and ensuring that there's no duplication of efforts. So once evidence is collected, the question becomes, where can it be reported and who will act on it? Afghan women's rights defenders and civil rights groups have created networks already to forward testimony. These reports, of course, feed into the work of UN mechanisms, the UN Special Rapporteur's work, but also the ICC's work, of course. And one thing I wanted to also highlight is that this visibility is, while it's critical, of course, it is not yet sufficient. We need to ensure that the gravity that these reports make very clear, the widespread and systematic nature of violations, is not simply debated and repeated at the UN. It is beyond time for there to be follow-up action to these various reports that have come out. So right now, what we see is the gap between reporting and enforcement is wide. It's too wide. And the gap has been so long-standing that it itself is becoming an injustice. And we, as the international community who are working, of course, as part of the Human Rights Council process, should not be perpetuating that. So every testimony that is bravely shared should not vanish into a report. Survivor stories and testimonies should be preserved in a format that can support legal action in the future, as well as transitional justice mechanisms. In other words, reports can't be the end point right now. And what is most needed, of course, is adequate support, not only to the documenters, but also support on the other end in relation to opening up opportunities for these reports to translate to enforcement, which is what I'd like to speak about next. So, as everybody knows, the International Criminal Court has, of course, taken the important step to issue arrest warrants in the case of Afghanistan and is continuing with its investigation, where we can expect further arrest warrants to come down. But the risk is not completely cleared, for example, that the International Criminal Court's work continues in a way that ensures that the reality Afghan women and girls are facing right now in Afghanistan is adequately captured in the investigations and court processes. So, adequate resources to the court, of course, protection of the court's independence, of course, need to continue, where it's facing significant risk about that right now. But also the connection between civil society and the court investigations needs to be improved. The court itself needs to make sure that it's adequately connecting with civil society who is doing this work and extending various protection measures to civil society who is doing this work. Second, national courts who traditionally exercise universal jurisdiction, as well as courts generally, even in those states that haven't exercised universal jurisdiction. This mechanism is essential. It's absolutely essential, particularly when we see states such as Afghanistan right now, where justice is not attainable. In order for us to ensure that at least some measure of accountability is there and to help break the deadlock, just break the deadlock in accountability processes, universal jurisdiction is an incredibly useful tool. What we need now is for courts around the world to ensure that they continue to allow for universal jurisdiction to be used. And civil society also in this process can start to look into what options are there in relation to universal jurisdiction, ensuring, of course, that the documentation that they're doing does translate to longer accountability processes in that way as well. But still, that's not enough. And of course, civil society cannot be the only ones documenting for these processes because they are so time intensive, resource intensive, and require the infrastructure, not just in terms of like, the bandwidth on one computer, but we're talking about enormous amounts of space that are needed and different digital forensic technologies that are needed to preserve the evidence. For this, and I joined civil society in this call, us at the ICJ have also been making this call for quite some time, and I also join with the UN Special Rapporteur, Richard Bennett, in this call, that the Human Rights Council needs to take the step to establish an independent investigative mechanism for Afghanistan. And this is essential for this process of justice and accountability. It's a central point. As we look across different pathways beyond these three that I've already listed, a few principles must, of course, always guide these efforts. First, the survivor-centered approach, ensuring that women and girls of Afghanistan remain the center and the driving voices to each and every one of these processes. Further, it's about the international community, international CSOs, like from what I'm from, and otherwise working as partners with Afghan civil society to establish networks of trust. It is part of documentation. So again, we're not duplicating efforts. We're ensuring that the small resources that we're all working with at this moment in time can be spread out. Second, intersectionality. Gender is just one aspect of every individual's experience, but we also need to look, of course, to other aspects of people's experiences, including their ethnic and religious minority status, as well as their sexual orientation. And then finally, we need the political will. So documentation, of course, without consequences is not neutral. Documentation without consequences is a statement in and of itself, which is why I said at the beginning, when we allow for these reports and the testimony of women and girls to continue without further action, it is making a statement of its own. So the demand right now is clear. Afghan women and girls are not asking only to be heard, they're asking for action. And every testimony must be safeguarded, every violation recorded with care, and every piece of evidence connected to a pathway toward justice. This is how we move from words to accountability. And this is what I want to encourage, of course, those in the room to contribute toward. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Savadra, for these important insights. My next question is for Ms. Abbasi. Based on your work at Human Rights Watch, how is documentation of gender-based violations being carried out in Afghanistan? And how can proper reporting and accountability mechanisms support justice for women?
Thank you so much. Before getting the question, let me set a little bit of the context of what is happening right now in Afghanistan. 15th of August this year marked the 4th anniversary of the Taliban takeover, a very grim anniversary for me and my millions of fellow Afghans whose daily life is marked by hunger, fear, and repression. It's also the anniversary of broken promises by the international community, including the countries who were heavily involved in Afghanistan in the past 20 years. As Raquel said before me, it's time to stand in solidarity with Afghan women, not only by words, but in action. The Taliban passed a very abusive law last August called the PVPV law, or the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice law. This is the law that says women's voices can't be heard outside the house. This is the law that says women need to be accompanied by a mature male guardian or a mahram when they want to use public transportation. This is the law that says Muslim women are not allowed to become friends with non-Muslim women. So you can see the extent of repression. Afghan women no longer feel safe in their own houses in the country, and there is zero protection for them. We have had cases and reports of women being detained by the PBPV ministry for not abiding according to the hijab rules, whatever the way that the Taliban are defining it as a proper hijab, or for not being accompanied by a man, basically. And we have so many women in this room, and I want you just to feel for a minute, how does it feel for you to be in the streets and being detained only because a man is not accompanying you? It's not only about the restriction, it's not only about the implementations of these laws, to what extent the Taliban can implement this. It is very humiliating for a woman. It literally eradicates women's individuality, autonomy. And I always think about it, that it makes me very angry to think about it. But even though I'm very privileged because I'm not living in Afghanistan right now, I mean, obviously I cannot feel what a woman feels in Takhar right now. I cannot feel what a woman feels in Helmand right now, what a woman feels in Kabul right now. So with that, I want to now move to the question about the documentation. There is a huge gap in the documentation in Afghanistan right now. We do not have a mechanism right now, an independent mechanism right now that can investigate abuses in Afghanistan and preserves evidence and identifies perpetrators. We have the UN Special Rapporteur, which is doing a great job, and his work has been very vital for our advocacy. He's been creating a very great platform, especially at the UN Human Rights Council for Afghan Women, and to come and speak about what is happening on the ground. But we need a mechanism to complement his vital work. And this is the mechanism that 107 organizations, including a local organization in the country, have reiterated their call, signing a letter, which probably some of you have received, calling on the UN Human Rights Council to act now. I think we have explored all options. And I mean, this call is not new. This has been made so many times at the UN Human Rights Council. No further kicking can down the road is needed at this point. We need the Council to act urgently and immediately establish a mechanism for Afghanistan this session, because all the thresholds for having that mechanism is needed. No one currently in Afghanistan is identifying perpetrators. No one is preserving evidence in Afghanistan. And those are huge gaps when it comes to documentation. We want to hold the Taliban accountable. I think one thing that we all agree in this room is that we want to hold the Taliban accountable for the grave abuses that they have violated, especially against that they have committed, especially against women and girls in Afghanistan. But if one day we want to hold them accountable, we need to be able to document it now. And it begins from now. So, for example, if you're speaking about the ongoing ICC investigation, if we speak about the CEDAW initiative that Canada, Australia, Netherlands, and Germany has moved forward, if you're talking about universal jurisdiction cases, all of these national and international criminal investigations need evidence, needs case building, and no one can do this work except a UN-mandated mechanism. And in similar situations like Syria, Myanmar, this council has decided that such a mechanism needs to be established. And we believe that's what Afghanistan needs right now, a peaceful Afghanistan, an Afghanistan in peace with itself and with its neighbors, need accountability, need justice, and victims in Afghanistan deserve justice. Just adding to that, I just want to also say that since last session that we all gathered together, I mean, I'm sure that you have had consultations with Afghan women, you have heard from Afghan rights defender about what is happening on the ground. I mean, the situation, the Taliban have really intensified their attacks. I mean, if you look at the implementation of PV law, you can see that these arrests have increased, not only for hijab, but also for women not being accompanied by a mahram. Also, in terms of engagement with the Taliban, I mean, Russia has recognized the Taliban, but also we see increased engagement from some countries, unfortunately, including European countries. Germany has invited hosting 2 Taliban diplomats in Germany. Following to that, Switzerland has also hosted a delegation of Taliban, 4 members of the Taliban in Switzerland, to facilitate deportation. As an Afghan woman sitting in Switzerland today, talking about it, knowing that the Taliban have visited, it makes me scared. I mean, we're talking about a country that the ICC has already issued arrest warrants for its leaders for the crimes against humanity of gender persecution. So, I mean, as an Afghan woman, I have every right to not feel safe around the Taliban, or knowing the fact that the Taliban have now access to these countries. I will stop here, but I mean, again, I really want all of you to hear Afghan women. I think this is what my other sisters in the previous panel have also spoke about. You've heard this call quite a lot. This is what we want to see. Words are enough, and there is need for action, and we are really hoping that the Council hears the Afghan civil society and also the call from the Special Rapporteur and establishes a comprehensive accountability mechanism for Afghanistan this session.
Thank you, Ms. Obasi, for highlighting those key points. I would like to give the floor to Ms. Siddiqui. From a legal standpoint, what are the main barriers that the victims of gender-based violence in Afghanistan face when seeking justice? And how can international mechanisms help address these gaps?
Thank you. Let me start with thanking Shahmama and the other co-sponsor of this event. Thank you for making this happen. And in addition, I want to emphasize that my brothers and sisters in Konar and Nangarhar in urgent need of your help. Please help them and take the humanitarian aid, especially the situation of women and girls in these areas seriously. Back to your question. When we talk about gender-based violence, many people think of isolated incidents, physical abuses, sexual assault, or other restriction on work and education. But in Afghanistan, under the rule of Taliban, it goes far beyond that. Gender-based crimes, they are systematic and deliberate. They are not random acts of violence. They are part of the organized efforts to silence, control, and erase women simply because of their gender. Afghan women's rights activists have been documented that since the Taliban took power in August 2021, they have issued at least 243 decrees, orders, and regulation restricting women's rights. The very first order issued in 13 August 2021 instructed imams to provide list of the unmarried women between age of 12 and 45. More recently, the Taliban ordered the removal of women's photograph from national ID cards. So just imagine you have an ID card without your picture because you're a woman. These examples shows that the gender persecution in Afghanistan is systematically deliberate and ongoing. So what are the main barriers when we talk about gender-based violence inside of Afghanistan? First of all, the collapse of justice system. The Afghan legal system has collapsed under the Taliban control. They refuse to apply penal code, civil code, and laws such as the elimination of violence against women and anti-harassment regulation. Instead, they impose their own strict interpretation of Islamic law, creating a system that legitimizes and even enforces gender-based violence. Second, absence of judicial independence. Courts and prosecutors operate under the Taliban ideology and do not protect women and girls. There is no judicial independence or due process. Cultural and social barriers. Survivors of gender-based violence face a stigma and shame. Families often push women to remain silent or to settle cases through tribal or informal system, which is a favor of perpetrators. Collapse of civil society. NGOs and women's rights organizations that previously documented gender-based violence cases have been forced to close or operate under the severe restriction, leaving survivors with almost no support. So when the domestic legal system fails, it becomes the responsibility of international community to step in. Afghan women have placed their hopes in international accountability mechanism, yet these mechanisms also face barriers. International Criminal Court, ICC, is the first mechanism. The ICC Afghanistan investigation is limited to crimes committed after the October 2002. That excludes many victims who suffered before that date. The Office of Prosecutor has admitted to a lack of resources, both financial and human, to properly investigate gender-based crimes. Victims still inside of Afghanistan cannot safely provide testimony under the ICC current policies such as no harm policy. past USA sanction against ICC officials working on Afghanistan also weakened its capacity. CEDAW case before the International Court of Justice, ICJ. Germany, the Netherlands, Australia, and Canada initiated a case against the Taliban based on a violation of Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, which Afghanistan has been a party to since 2003. However, Article 29 of the CEDAW requires period negotiation. The Taliban refused to engage, and the treaty does not impose a clear time limit on the negotiation. As a result, the case has been settled for a year. People's Tribunal on Gender Persecution in Afghanistan. Afghan civil society initiated People's Tribunal scheduled for 9 until 11 October 2025 in Madrid, Spain. While its decision will not be legally binding, it can play an important role in documenting crimes and raising global awareness. To overcome this barrier, the following steps are essential. 1, as my colleague emphasized, strong documentation. Support Afghan women's group and civil society organization to document gender-based violence in a systematic and safe way. Build resources, databases of testimonies, evidence, and survivor counts for use the international court. Creation of independent investigation mechanism for Afghanistan. Establish an independent international mechanism similar to UN mechanism for Syria and Myanmar. To collect and preserve the analyze evidence of crimes, including gender persecution in Afghanistan. This mechanism would ensure accountability even when the ICC and ICJ face limitation. Activation of the universal jurisdiction. Encourage states such as Germany, France, the Netherlands, and others to use universal jurisdiction to persecute Taliban and other perpetrators for gender persecution. This must include not only Taliban leaders, but also members of the other extremist group or official who committed crimes against Afghan women in the past 4 decades. Accountability cannot be selective. Justice must be for all survivors. Universal jurisdiction cases have already been successful in Syria and could serve as a model for Afghanistan. The International Court of Justice, the 4 countries that filed the case under the CEDAW must push the process forward. Article 29 requires negotiation first, but negotiation cannot be endless. If the Taliban refuse to engage, the applicant states should move to the arbitration stage without delay. The process must not be hijacked by Taliban in action or delay tactics. Recognize the Taliban system as a gender apartheid under the international law. Maintain sanction and diplomatic measures targeting Taliban leaders responsible for the gender persecution. Ensure that humanitarian aid includes gender-sensitive programs to support Afghan women and survivors of gender-based violence. Colleagues, what is happening in Afghanistan today is not only a human rights crisis, it is a form of gender apartheid. Afghan women are being erased from public life in a way that world has not seen since the darkest day of the 1990s. We cannot wait for a slow negotiation or limited mandates. Afghan women need justice, accountability, and solidarity now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all 3 of our panelists today for their powerful contributions. We will now open the floor for questions and discussions. We will have 15 minutes. I kindly ask the participants to keep their questions brief. And if you wish, please introduce yourself with your name and affiliation. Yes.
Question is for Farishta John about documentation, and also for this panel that given its importance for accountability mechanisms, and has in the last 4 years, has there been efforts to combine efforts among different organizations in how you're going to document atrocity crimes in Afghanistan against women and girls, ethnic minority? Because we talk about documentation, but I have failed to see a concrete guidelines on what does documentation mean, because there are certain guidelines on for ICC, for ICJ, that what documentation means. Is there something that your organization, who you are focused on working on documentation, that looks at joining efforts, not duplicating, which has been already mentioned, that to make sure that there's a clear guideline for the underground civil society inside Afghanistan, that what is documentation, what kind of documentation are they doing, what kind of videos, photos they need to take, because we are receiving maybe hundreds of these photos every day, but we do not know if we are able to use it in the cases that we are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. I mean, the sort of documentation that my organization is doing is human rights documentation. Most of the documentation we have had are public reports on our website. In terms of, I mean, I'm sure every international organization have their own guidelines, and as I said, that what our documentation is not a criminal sort of investigation. It's very different. The bar is way lower than the ICC investigation or any other mechanism. I mean, again, I just want to repeat this, that because you mentioned ICC and ICJ and other international justice avenues, the reason that these international organizations have joint efforts with the national organization calling for this mechanism is because no one else can do that sort of work. It's not really international organizations' job. It's not civil society's job to document the human rights violations on the ground in a way that could be used in a court of law. It's impossible, because it's a very different type of documentation. It needs very different expertise, and that's why that international organizations have been seeing this gap and have been calling for a mandate that can fill that. To what extent civil society is coordinating with each other, I am aware of some trainings that have been ongoing for civil society organizations, specifically local organizations, on how to document abuses. But I also want to say that it has become extremely difficult to document human rights abuses in Afghanistan because the Taliban are actively blocking accessing information in Afghanistan. So there's a lot of censorship happening in the country. People are really scared to speak to anyone. The media cannot report what is happening in Afghanistan, let alone organizations documenting these violations. I think someone in the previous panel mentioned that people are scared of posting their opinions about, what is happening in Afghanistan. Basically, no critical reporting is allowed. So that will make it very difficult for organizations to be able to document.
Are there any other questions? This will then conclude panel 1. On behalf of the organizers, the Global Human Rights Defense, and
just wanted to ask because it would work because she wants to speak.
Of course.
Our technical colleagues are here. You can ask them to unmute her. Yes.
Raquel, can you unmute yourself?
I can because we can see the comments.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. It was saying that only the organizer could unmute me and I couldn't unmute myself. But okay, so to second, of course, what Faresh just said about different forms of documentation and different standards applied. So when it comes to court processes, there's only certain types of documentation that can then go and be admitted as evidence, for example. That doesn't mean that all other forms of documentation are not usable. They will also inform how where the investigation is going to go, what courts should be looking at, etc. Also, that helps identify individuals who may be asked to come in as witnesses. And the idea here is that we need all of these forms of documentation. We need journalistic forms of documentation. We need human rights forms of documentation. And we also need, of course, the kind of documentation that directly gets turned into evidence, entered into the court as evidence. So I would say that we, not to feel bad or to say that civil society documentation is not useful, because it is, even though we can't document to the level, like as exactly what Faresh just said, we can't document to that level and we need a body that can. But all the documentation we do will inform whatever that body does. And so, of course, that means that what we do is important. We can also help maybe share some standards that have been produced, because there is guidance that's been produced on civil society documentation that could maybe go to serve to helping organize also and standardize across civil society. So happy to share those resources if needed. And sorry to make a fuss for the unmute thing. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, now you can. Thanks very much for that clarification, Raquel. I think that was needed. I just wanted to make a couple of points. I've been talking to the ICC in the recent days. They asked me to share with civil society that despite the pressure they're under and the sanctions that have been imposed, they want to reassure all of you that they are continuing their investigation. It is business as usual for them. And they just felt, because they'd had some feedback and seen on social media and so on, that there's some kind of questioning about whether they would be continuing their investigation on Afghanistan. They are. And they do have considerable resources. I met their team. It's much bigger than my team. I wish I had as big a team, but they do have some capacity, and they are investigating in terms of, as I think we're all aware here, for criminal law, for criminal prosecutions. And it's good that we sort out the difference between different types of investigations. And I think that's useful to spend a bit of time on that, because my mandate has a responsibility. I'm mandated to document and preserve information about human rights violations in Afghanistan. And I do that to the degree that I have resources. We use the same database as the ICC uses, not the same data, but the same type of software. It's not the same, the same database, and which is also used by, I understand, by the bodies in Syria and Myanmar that's been talked about. But our standard of investigation is a human rights standard. It's the same as the fact-finding missions and the commissions of inquiry at the UN. It does verify and corroborate information, but at the level of reasonable ground to believe, not the level of beyond reasonable doubt. However, you might ask me why there's a gap. And one of the reasons is the different type of investigations. The other is the resource gap. The Council, the Human Rights Council, the member states have voted in favor of giving me decent amount of resources. I'm supposed to have 10 support staff this year. That's up from 4 in year 1 and 8 in year 2 or 3, and now I don't have those staff. It's not the Council. It's the UN machinery that is not delivering those staff. And it's not only my mandate. Because of the financial issues at the UN, all of the investigative bodies, commissions of inquiry, fact-finding missions, are getting at the moment, the aim is to get a maximum of 50% of the staff posts filled. Half. I don't even have half. But that's the goal, is to reach half. So that is the desperate situation that we find ourselves in. Thank you. Oh, and also one thing I'd like to finally add is the very first principle on any kind of human rights work, documentation, investigation, whatever type, is the principle of doing no harm and of ensuring that you protect the victims and witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are no further statements or questions, I would like to conclude panel 1. On behalf of the organizers, the Global Human Rights Defense and Shahmama, I would like to sincerely thank again the 3 panelists, Ms. Raquel Saavedra, Ms. Frishta Obosi, and Ms. Sanga Siddiqui for their valuable insights. And I want to thank all of you for your engagement. We will now take a short break of 15 minutes and we will reconvene for panel 2. Thank you.
Distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, thank you for coming back for our second panel. My name is Ilona Alexandra. I am the Secretary of the United Nations Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls with a special procedure of the Human Rights Council. And we have been supporting Afghan women in their struggle for gender justice since intensively since 2023, but also before. So it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. We have a slight change. We will have 5 panelists instead of 4, of which 1 will be online. So first we will have Charlotte Zehrer, who is a human rights officer at the Global Human Rights Defense. Then online we will have Ivana Krstic, who is currently the vice chair of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. And she will be followed by Zakia Eliassi, who is a human rights defender. And then we will have a journalist perspective from Zahra Joya. And we will finish with another human rights defender, Farouk Leka Unshizada. So without further ado, I will give the floor to our panelists, and I will actually pose a question to each of them. So let us start with Charlotte. As you know, as a human rights officer, from the perspective of international NGOs, can you tell us how can global human rights organizations best amplify Afghan women's voices and also work with grassroots defenders to influence global policy and accountability mechanisms?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Ilona, for this great question. This is a really important question indeed. Can you hear me all right? Yeah, great. So, dear colleagues, dear excellencies, I am here today in my role as a human rights officer at Global Human Rights Defense. But really, what I want to be speaking on is on behalf of a larger community of NGOs who work every day alongside Afghan women and grassroots defenders, like we do with our partner Shahmama. Now, the question that Ilona has asked me is simple, but it's not easy to answer. How can international organizations really amplify Afghan women's voices and work with defenders on the ground to influence global policy and accountability? I want to start by saying this. Afghan women do not need us to speak for them. They have the courage, they have the experience, they have the knowledge, but the one thing that they are lacking is access. Access to decision-making spaces like this one, and protection when they speak out. I think we've heard this from several panelists that protection is something that Afghan women, human rights defenders are seriously lacking. And that's where international NGOs like ours can make a real difference. For me, there are three key things here that we as NGOs can do and that most importantly, we can do better. The first is we need to make sure Afghan women have safe and direct channels to speak for themselves at the global level. It happens too often that their words are filtered through reports or lost altogether because of security risks. And NGOs can help by providing secure platforms, by arranging close briefings, and just keeping the voices of women inside Afghanistan connected to the women in exile. And here the goal is a very simple one. When policy is made, Afghan women should be in the room. And not just quoted in footnotes to reports. The second thing is that we need to build stronger bridges between local defenders and the global advocacy. Grassroots networks like Shahmama, who's hosting this today, know what's really happening on the ground. I think we've heard this extensively today. And NGOs like ours, on the other hand, we know how to navigate UN mechanisms, we know how to navigate international law. And the real power for me comes when those two sides work together. What is important is when local testimonies are turned into evidence before treaty bodies, something that we've also previously heard, or into recommendations here at the Human Rights Council. And that way the local struggles become part of global accountability. Now, the third thing that I want to mention is that we have to be clear about accountability. And here I want to highlight this growing call that we've also previously heard to recognize gender apartheid as an international crime. This is something Afghan women themselves have been demanding, and it's something that, like the Special Rapporteur, Richard Bennett, we fully support. Naming gender apartheid for what it is truly matters because it makes visible the systematic exclusion and oppression of women, and it opens the door to real accountability at the international level. And NGOs can play a big role here. We can provide legal expertise, push the debate forward, and make sure that it is Afghan women's voices that drive that effort. So to bring it together, because I don't want to take up too much time with 5 panelists here today, and to answer your question, amplifying Afghan women's voices isn't just about solidarity, it's also about effectiveness. Policies that don't include them will inevitably fail. Mechanisms designed without their realities won't deliver. But when grassroots defenders and international NGOs work together, when we connect local voices to global action, and when we push for accountability, that's when change can start to happen. Our role as NGOs is not to overshadow, but to support. And it's not to speak instead of, but to make sure that Afghan women are heard loudly, clearly, and where it matters most. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for opening our panel with such practical ideas. Let us now move to our second panelist, who should be hopefully ready online. So this would be Ivana Kristic, the Vice Chair of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. And Ivana, I hope you can hear me. We would like you to tell us a little bit about what do you think, how effective has the international response been so far, in your opinion, from the position of the working group? And how can we balance the immediate humanitarian needs with justice and accountability? You have the floor.
Thank you so much, dear Ilona. I hope that you can also hear me. If you can just confirm that you can hear me, yeah? All is well?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Then good afternoon. Distinguished colleagues, I'm truly honored to speak today from the perspective of the working group, and I'm also personally very deeply inspired by the strength and resilience of Afghan women and girls. I also have to apologize for repeating some of the points that have already been raised by previous speakers. Since August 2001, Afghan women and girls have been subjected to the most extreme forms of institutionalized discrimination anywhere in the world. And the women themselves described as prisoners in their own homes. As a result of the joint visit of Richard and Dorothy Estrada Thank, who was at the time the chair of our working group, to Afghanistan in 2003, and the joint report, which was produced as a result of that visit, we were able to evaluate firsthand the dire situation of the human rights of women and girls in the country, which has become worse since then. The most recent reports are also particularly alarming. Young girls arbitrarily arrested on the streets under the pretext of bad hijab. This is not about clothing, and I want to underline that this is about the control, about reducing women and girls to objects of surveillance and punishment. And as this session is dedicated to gender justice, which is about dismantling the structures of oppression, holding perpetrators accountable, and ensuring that women and girls can live with equality, dignity, and freedom, I would like to underline that it is important and that gender justice really requires naming this system for what it is. And working group is of the opinion that it is a gender apartheid, as was mentioned by Charlotte previously. Why do we believe so? Because what is happening is not merely a collection of discriminatory practices, but a deliberate and institutionalized regime that seeks to exclude women from society altogether. Last year, in 2004, our working group developed a guidance document on gender apartheid, which argues for its recognition as a potential crime against humanity to be included in the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity, which is currently under negotiation. The guidance document points out that gender apartheid is understood as a grave and systemic human rights violation under the existing international human rights law. And moreover, it also recognizes that it is a form of, and that it is a part of imperative or jus cogens norms in international public law by analogy and extrapolation of the prohibition of racial apartheid, currently recognized as such, as a jus cogens norm. Thus, it is not merely a pattern of isolated policies. It is a systemic and institutionalized form of oppression that demands urgent legal recognition, accountability, as was also mentioned by some previous speakers, and also, I would say, reaffirmation of substantive gender equality. The recognition of gender apartheid as a crime against humanity is really vital, not only to hold perpetrators accountable, but also to ensure that Afghan women and girls receive the protection of justice that they deserve. Justice also means addressing the intergenerational impact. And I think that we should also be reminded of that fact. And this is that the lost futures of girls barred from schools who are silenced from public debate, but also from other aspects of their everyday life, it has an impact on deep psychological harm, which is inflicted by constant fear and also coercion. As one of the issues for this panel was what would be important to bring gender justice closer to reality in Afghanistan, I would say that we have a lot of steps, and some of them were also raised by Richard this morning. But I would also state that states must provide asylum and safe pathways for Afghan women and girls fleeing persecution. Our working group, in its most recent press releases, has stressed that Afghan women and girls should not be treated as migrants. They must be recognized as refugees under international law, given the systemic and institutional nature of the persecution they face. We have urged states to grant them refugee or regular resident status, to uphold the principle of non-refoulement that was also mentioned by Richard, and to ensure their full access to education, healthcare, and employment in-house, re-victimization them and perpetrating their exclusion. So as our statements emphasize, this is not only about offering protection at the border, it is about guaranteeing long-term safety, dignity, and empowerment for displaced Afghan women. Also, one of the issues that was raised before was to provide sustained, flexible funding for Afghan women-led organizations, those who are on front lines of support both within Afghanistan and also in exile. These groups are not merely aid providers. They are feminist movements of resistance, creating spaces of care, solidarity, and survival under impossible conditions. Millions of women and girls in Afghanistan are enduring intersecting crises, poverty and hunger, economic collapse, and their human rights violations. And now a devastating earthquake has destroyed entire communities. In these conditions, it is Afghan women themselves who are first responders, organizing shelters, distributing food, providing emotional care, advocating for justice. And yet, paradoxically, they are systemically excluded from funding streams and decision-making spaces. And in order to support Afghan women is not an issue of charity, but recognition that women are leading the struggle for survival and justice, even in the most hostile environments. And also, as it was mentioned by Charlotte, Afghan women must be at the center of all decisions and discussions about their country's future. Their participation must be central, from shaping humanitarian responses and rebuilding strategies, but also to participating in local governance and justice mechanisms. And only then can solutions become transformative, not just temporary fixes. Dear colleagues, the arbitrary arrest of girls for so-called bad hijab shows us how far this system of oppression has gone and how urgently we must act. Gender apartheid is not just a legal concept. It is the daily reality of millions of Afghan women and girls. And let us ensure that Afghan women are no longer silenced, but heard, protected, and empowered. And with that, I will also return to the question, Ilona, and thank you so much for asking me on the international response. I would say, and it was also mentioned by some previous speakers, that international response has been important, but it is also insufficient. And we have seen some steps forward, for example, states invoking CEDAW, referral to the ICC, request for arrest warrant, and consistent pressure from UN mechanisms. And what is really important is that all these mechanisms, which were invoked by different actors, have helped to frame the Taliban's policies as crimes against humanity and kept Afghan women's rights on the international agenda, which is at this point extremely important. However, I would say that in my opinion, this process is slow, and also I would criticize it from the perspective that it is fragmented. While Afghan women and girls suffer from today and with really dire human rights and extreme examples of human rights violations. And what we also know is that if we take legal instruments, legal remedies, they also take years. While in the meanwhile, we see that girls are still barred from schools, women are still being arrested, for bad hijab, and communities are reeling from humanitarian collapse. So this is why I would say that it is extremely important to balance immediate humanitarian needs with justice and accountability, that they really need to go together simultaneously, and that humanitarian aid cannot be delivered in ways that sideline women or make them invisible. But also at the same time, I would argue that justice cannot wait for better times. And in addition to CEDAW and ICC actions and some other actions which were already mentioned, I would say also that it's important not to forget the importance of universal jurisdiction or the institute recognizing prosecution for grave crimes wherever possible to ensure perpetrators know that there is no safe haven. So I would stop here saying that this is a simultaneous action and that we really need more comprehensive action on the part of the international community at the moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ivana, for sharing this perspective of the working group and elaborating on what the working group believes are the steps that are needed at the international level. As we said now, when we're talking about the current realities in the panel, it is the most important to hear from Afghan women themselves, and we're very fortunate to have 3 of them, and we will on the panel, and we're going to start with the first human rights defender, which is Zakia Eliassi. And Zakia, I would like to ask you, as a human rights defender, how can Afghan women human rights defenders, both inside and outside of Afghanistan, work together to ensure that the ongoing violations, including arbitrary detentions, are effectively documented and addressed at the international level?
Thank you, Elena, for the question. Distinguished speakers, representative of states, members, good afternoon and welcome. I will try to keep my remarks brief because I know that we are all a little bit tired. Well, it's deeply painful that every time when we gather to speak about Afghanistan, the situation has become worse than before. Today, in addition to all this crisis that already existed in Afghanistan, just a few days ago, the people were struck by a natural disaster, as it was mentioned before, a tragedy that has added to our pain. We have lost more than 1,400 of our fellow citizens in Sunday night earthquake in Kunar. Even in such a devastating moment, the Taliban have failed to provide proper assistance or relief, which is very normal. I think it's very common. They are not there to help Afghan people. To save, to rescue, I think it's not very compatible with their values and ideologies. I extend my deepest condolence on this tragic incident to the people of Afghanistan and families of victims. About the question, we all know that the state of human rights, and especially women's rights in Afghanistan today, is at its worst stage. We are facing a complete humanitarian catastrophe. I do not wish to go further details and repeat what we already know and what was already mentioned with my colleagues who spoke before me. These facts are no secret for the world. Since the beginning of their rule, the Taliban have violated all human and social rights of women and all people of Afghanistan, and have not been held accountable in any way. And that's why it's continuing to happen. With the decrees issued by the Taliban leadership and with the reality we see every day in Afghanistan, women are no longer treated as human beings. They are reduced to the level of men's property, lifeless objects without rights or agency, denied any control and over their destiny and over their life. And What does it mean? It means the loss of everything, the loss of human dignity as women in Afghanistan. Despite all these obstacles and restrictions, I firmly believe that there are still countless brave and courageous women from Afghanistan who are determined to cooperate with women and colleagues outside the country to fight against injustice and oppression of Taliban. They are prepared to take the greatest risk to stand up for their sisters and to defend their human and social rights. This is the proof of determination and resilience of women in the face of oppression and humiliation of human dignity in Afghanistan. Another point is we must also know that documenting a woman rights violation in Afghanistan is nearly impossible from outside the country. For accurate documentation of violation against women, we inevitably need support and testimony from within the country. Yet we must also be extremely cautious because many women inside Afghanistan, if they participate in such efforts, they will risk their life. The Taliban do not take such matters lightly. Even the smallest act of advocacy against them often ends in imprisonment, torture, and ultimately death. Also, their families are not safe either. They will be punished because one of the members are active. As we witnessed today, even local women, those who have no involvement at all in activism or advocacy, are subjected to the Taliban's cruelty and gender-based discrimination. Many are arrested or punished under different pretexts without any reason. So if this is the situation for local women, what will be, imagine what will be the situation for women who lives there. They are local women, but they try to be active and to contest against what the Taliban are doing. Above all else, we must think about their safety. Security must be the first priority. We need to discuss and establish safe methods of work and secure mechanisms that can protect them before everything that needs to be done. These mechanisms are not yet created, but in creation of this mechanism, we need to make it as safe as possible for the women who are inside Afghanistan. So in three main points: one, precise and secure documentation of violation, including arbitrary arrests, must be carried out within the country. This requires training in safe tools, professional methods of evidence collection, and strict protection of identities of victims and witnesses. Second point, women rights defenders outside the country, the members of civil society, should translate these records into language of international law and share them with UN mechanisms, special reporters, the Human Rights Council, and international human rights organization. This way, effort inside and outside the country support and complete each other, and then can be effective. Third point, we should use the power of global solidarity. By connecting with women inside Afghanistan and human rights organizations in other countries, we can create more international pressure and make sure violations are not ignored. I believe that the cooperation between women inside and outside the country can make sure violations in Afghanistan are documented and addressed internationally, because it's only through international and collective collaboration and attention that we can find a way out of this current crisis. And finally, despite everything that has been said, I want to make one final point. What we must fundamentally and truly believe, no matter how many sacrifices we make or how hard we try, without a collective will to act, all this effort will unfortunately be in vain. We urgently need the serious attention of the international community and their sincere action toward resolving the crisis in Afghanistan. The women and people of Afghanistan will stand bravely as they stood in the past against the oppression, and they are calling for the support and cooperation of the international community. So we need this determination everywhere. And let us not forget that the crisis in Afghanistan is not only about the women, they are the main victims, but today thousands of innocent people are imprisoned, tortured, and even killed under different pretexts. The rights of religious minority are being violated, and the rights of various ethnic groups, including Hazara and Shia community, are systematically denied. They face severe oppression and persecution. They are facing forced displacement from their lands and homes in Bamiyan and Behsud. This is another clear example of human rights violation under Taliban rule. Therefore, I believe that by truly understanding and listening to the discussions taking place here or in any other forum, when we leave these rooms, we must make every effort to ensure that countries and international institutions and organizations take concrete action to address the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, especially in the area of women's rights. This is a great responsibility for all of us, for the world today. We know that unfortunately the world is moving in another direction. It's a different direction, yet we still have hopes in our hearts. We are the people who have endured centuries of pain and suffering. The generation before us, our mothers, our grandmothers, has endured a lot of pain. And we will continue to fight. We continue in this path to make a positive future for Afghanistan. We believe in the world that still upholds human rights, women's rights, and fundamental freedoms. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zakia, for reminding us of the great courage of Afghan women, both outside and inside the country, and also the risk that are associated with their actions, and which is something that we absolutely must consider before we engage with them in any way. So thank you for this. And we will continue with more human rights defenders, including the journalistic perspective. And let me welcome Zahra Joya, who she's a journalist and founder of the Rukshana Media, which reflects on women's realities under Taliban rule. Zahra, can you tell us, how do you see the role of independent media in amplifying the women's voices and also exposing violations such as arbitrary arrests over this bad jihad to the world, to the international community and the world?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us and being here today with us. So first of all, I want to say that after 4 dark years in Afghanistan, I feel like I have nothing left to say because I believe we have already spoken a lot here and elsewhere. Perhaps it has become tiring for you as well. That's why I want to ask you, if your ears are tired of hearing sad news from and about Afghanistan, if yes, let's work together to change this atmosphere. I am sure our ears also need to hear beautiful stories and news from Afghanistan. This is good for our health and mental health too. For me, more than a decade as a journalist, in particular in the past 4 years, my work is centered on telling the stories of people of Afghanistan, especially women. There are stories that often ignored, silent, and deliberately erased by media, mainstream media, and also the other who are in the country. Today I speak here not only as a journalist, but also as a witness to the dangerous decline of press freedom in Afghanistan since the Taliban returned to power in August 2021. Obviously, I have been asked to talk about the role of independent media in amplifying women's voice, and to be honest, in today's Afghanistan, everything that support women is under attack, including the media itself. So first, the challenge that the media is facing, since the Taliban took power, Afghanistan has become one of the most dangerous countries in the world for journalists, especially for women journalists. And independent outlets, media have been shut down. Reporters' life are under harassment, under threats, and are under torture. And women journalists, I think more than 80% of female journalists has lost their job since 2021, and over 200 until 400 media outlets have been closed due to the Taliban pressure, financial collapse, and also the fear of safety, the media worker and journalist. And censorship is everywhere, even reporting about women rights, poverty, or civil resistance inside the country can be a great threat as a crime for those who are working independently in Afghanistan. So I believe in today's Afghanistan, telling the truth is not just journalism. I think it is. It can be act of courage for those who are still do not want to be silenced in the country. The second thing that I wanted to emphasize about why media matters, because the separation of free media is not only a issue. Press issue. It is a human rights crisis. It shows that the Taliban are afraid of media and journalists because they wanted to oppress people of Afghanistan, especially women and girls, in silence and in darkness. But we, as a journalist of Afghanistan, don't want to give up. We want to document every single of the violation that the Taliban are making for women and girls in Afghanistan. And also, we need, as I mentioned, we need to change this atmosphere. We need to invest in the different parts of the country, which is untouched yet. And we need to spend the money and the resources among the society and the communities. And we have to encourage those who are investing their money instead of buying weapons, spending in Afghanistan, instead they can create a new narrative for the new generation of Afghanistan. I think after 4 decades, people of Afghanistan, they deserve to live in the peace. They deserve to have a break from this war, from this oppression. And the third one, what we need to protect what remains to Afghan media, independent journalism, I think it's urgent action is required. First, a pathway to safety and asylum for those journalists who truly at risk. Unfortunately, at the moment, dozens of journalists, including male and female, they are in Pakistan and Iran, and most of them are sending back, and also in Turkey, and they are sending back without the consideration of their safety and the risk that they are facing. And how we can sustainable funding for Afghan-led independent media, especially those in exile or in diaspora, particularly the women-led media that we really need at the moment to bring the stories of untold stories from Afghanistan. And how we can direct support for women journalists through training, secure platforms, and emergency grants. According to my personal experience during these 4 years, when something happened immediately to my colleague in Afghanistan, my hands are empty. I have nothing to do for him. And this is something like, for my colleagues, they are taking a huge risk to get information. And the Taliban don't want. Honestly, they want to keep all of us without information. If we don't have information, I'm sure we don't have power as well. And finally, my call to you. I urge member state, UN bodies, and civil society to take real concrete steps. Press freedom in Afghanistan needs to be protected. We need solidarity from your side, whatever it's in a statement, in words, and real action. Fund independent Afghan-led media that document abuses and share the voice of people of Afghanistan on the ground. I think our experience shows that during these 4 years, media who are operating in exile, they are playing a crucial role in terms of documenting, in terms of putting pressure on the Taliban side, and in terms of giving a hope to the people of Afghanistan, especially women. Let me share this very brief, if I may. There's a story that a woman from a very remote area in Afghanistan, I don't want to mention the province name because of her safety. She has literally lost everything, literally lost the whole her life. She was the only breadwinner in her house before the Taliban. And when the Taliban took power, there was nothing left for her. And now she is stuck in her house and one child. And now she sometimes when she says, she told me, sometimes when I feel so frustrated, I am, asking my fellow neighbors to come to my house. They are taking, they are making a protest in their house and recording this video and taking pictures. And now, and after that, she is walking 2 hours to get the mountain, get a signal and access to internet and sending to us. And this is the thing that we need to keep these stories alive, and we need to keep the media outlets who are operating from inside Afghanistan, but they are in exile. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy you ended up on a positive note, and I very much look forward to more positive stories like this. But indeed, as you said, the reality is grim, and so I join your hope in that everyone in this room is tired of hearing how grim the reality is, and that however much it is in your capacities to join. To take Zahra up on her offer to work with her and work together so that we can hear more and more positive stories in the future. So thank you very much. And let us now move to our last panelist, who is also a human rights defender, Farooq Unchizada. And Farooq, for you, we would like to hear, based on your human rights work, what do you think are the most urgent protection needs of women and girls who are facing these daily restrictions and arbitrary arrests, and how can international actors respond better?
Thank you for the question. First of all, thank you for Shahmama organization and co-founders, and also thank you for organizing this meeting. Also, thank you for opportunity to give me to speak about the pain and the reality of the women of Afghanistan who they are facing in these difficult days. As you know that today under Taliban rule, human rights violations in Afghanistan are taking place in many forms. These issues have been raised repeatedly in international meetings and forums. Schools remain closed, and school remains closed to girls. Women are banned from work, and they are completely excluded from public life. These are clear examples of severe human rights violations. But beyond these well-known issues, there are deeper issues discussed, less discussed realities. Women are denied access to fair trials, judicial institutions have removed the women's sector, and the women are not permitted to file complaints in court when they face violence. Institutions that were established to protect women from violence, such as the Ministry of Women Affairs and also the Elimination of Violence Against Women Department, have been shut down. As a result, violence against women has risen to alarming levels, to alarming high levels, while cases of human rights violations remain legally undocumented. Support stadiums, once centers for joy and recreation, have been transformed into sites of public punishment. Instead of football matches, people are now forced to witness of public punishment, flogging, and torture, accompanied by the painful cries of victims. This public punishment have severely damaged the family reputations. In Afghanistan, traditionally, society, women subjected to such punishment are often stigmatized and considered as a source of shame, even by their own families. Extrajudicial public execution have sharply increased. Just last week in Herat province, a man was executed in public, and his body was displayed on the street. Such inhuman acts would wound the soul of society and violate every standards of human rights, as well as Article 4 of the Islamic Declaration on Human Rights. The rate of suicide among young people, both women and men, is rising due to hopelessness, poverty, social isolation, and unemployment. Many youth are experiencing serious mental and emotional distress as a result of restriction on freedom, denial of basic human rights, and lack of respect for their personal dignity. Freedom, girls also denied from their rights to wear the clothing of their choice. Similarly, boys are also denied from choosing their own clothing and also shaving their beards. These pressures have created an unbearable condition for many young people, pushing some of them towards suicide. Discrimination based on ethnicity, language, and religious is rapidly escalating in Afghanistan. A clear example is in the recent destruction of statue of Amir Ali Shir Navawi, the famous Turkish poet and also politician in Mazar-e Sharif. This act reflects the Taliban systematic marginalization of certain ethnic and linguistic communities. The Uzbek language has been a particular target of the Taliban policies. The Taliban have abolished the Uzbek language department and barred Uzbek students from participating in comparative examination. These actions go beyond ethnic discrimination. They attack on the history, culture, and identity of the certain nations. My response regarding your question summarized in 3 words: support, action, and justice. I would like to tell the world that Afghanistan women and girls urgently need protection, safe shelters, and a way to make their voices heard. The United Nations must hold the Taliban accountable for violating the international treaties such as CEDAW. The world must act by documenting crimes, bringing Taliban leaders in international court, and applying sanction, travel ban, and the politician isolation. At the same time, a victim needs safe pathway, legal protection, and the direct humanitarian aid. What Afghan women face today is not only a violence against human rights, but also crime against humanity. The international community must ensure accountability and deliver justice. Afghan women need more than words and sympathy. They need real support, real action, and real justice. Listen to their voices from behind closed doors, from prison cells, from homes turned into prison. They cry out, "We have the right to live, to learn, to work, and to have equal future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing these experiences and descriptions of human rights violations, I would say, basically with us, and also for suggesting some way forward for the international community. So we now have probably at least 10 minutes, perhaps more, since the other panel will be a little bit shorter. And the floor is open now to, if anyone would like to have a question or make a comment, please let us know. And yeah.
Very much, panelists, for such a grim but powerful, actionable remarks. My question is for Zahra, as founder of Roxana Media, one of the probably two that I can recall media organization that works on women rights issue. I would like to get your insight about conflict-related sexual violence that is happening in Afghanistan under the Taliban rule and the reporting of it. There are many cases of sexual violence, and considering it being such a taboo topic, even the UN is not covering it, and we know the sort of so many barriers for people to report it in the official media or documentation. But as a local organization and you're journalists on the ground, what are you hearing? How are you navigating this sensitivity to also report on this issue, which is very widespread, as we are hearing, but also the reservation that you may have or your journalists may have? So anything related on CRSV would be grateful to hear. Thank you.
It's a very good question. So in Afghanistan today, under Taliban rule, there is a general law which is banning women and oppressing the people of Afghanistan and everywhere. So basically, there is a system of oppression for people. But among side of the system, there is a double standard of behavior from the Taliban authorities to the people of Afghanistan. For instance, when we interviewed the women that they have been arrested because of the bad hijab or on the street or they protested, when some of them were from Hazara ethnic groups, they were faced with a double punishment. First, when they beaten them, when they tortured them, they didn't say you women, right? They said you Hazara women. And the second thing that I think this one is not only about Hazara. We had the same issue from the Tajik ethnic groups that they have been arrested and they said, you're from Panjshir, you're supporting, Ahmad Masood, something like this. And there is always double standards from the Taliban side. And the other thing I wanted to emphasize that it's really disappointing me sometimes that a group of a bunch of mullahs, that they have they are not met the global standards. Their leaders is not according to global standards leaders. Their behaviors, their laws, their all things is completely different. I really wonder why there is lots of engagement from and within the international community, and sadly they have a large engagement with the region countries. This is the harsh reality in Afghanistan.
Just checking in case any of the other panelists would like to also intervene on this question. If not,
just I want
to add some following her answers. Regarding that Hazara women also facing to discrimination by the Taliban because of their ethnicity, and also Uzbek the same. As you hear that in 2023, U.S. State Department released a report, and this is that in north of Afghanistan, in Faryab, in Samangan, and also in Balkh or Jawzjan, the Taliban arrested many Uzbek women, and they are in the prison. Unfortunately, the Taliban raped these prisoners in the inside of the prison, and from these women, 9 of women has been pregnancy. Unfortunately, the Taliban shot and killed these victims inside of the prison. But unfortunately, until now, this case remained unreported, and also none of the organization followed that, and also remained undocumented. Unfortunately, the Taliban are always they are against certain ethnic groups, and they are targeting such ethnicities. Thank you.
Yeah, and also I have to add it because they have a just says Tajik to Tajikistan, Uzbek to Uzbekistan, and Hazara to Goristan. It means Goristan, it means graves. So this is the behavior of this group in Afghanistan, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions or comments from the floor? Yes, go ahead, Richard. Thank you.
I guess it's more of a comment. And again, as I mentioned before, I'm in touch with the ICC, and they sometimes reach out to me, and they are looking for cases, and they, they welcome people sending them cases. Also, to say that we do some documentation of conflict-related sexual violence, including ethnically, the intersection with ethnicity and religion as well. I'm very much aware of that. Those cases in the north, in Balkh, I think, they were actually documented by the media. By Ashdesub. We spent a lot of time talking to Ashdesub, actually. It's kind of good that the State Department in its report included it, but I would also encourage the State Department, like us, to use more than one source when they are documenting cases. So, yeah, sorry about that.
Thank you very much. For the moment, I see no further hands, so one last chance if anyone has a question or comment. If not, then thank you very much for your attention, and I think we will be moving to the next panel now. Thank you. And of course, thanks so much to all our wonderful panelists.
Here we go. This panel is on international solidarity and the role of global actors. And we are joined by 2 speakers for this panel. Hilary Power, who is the head of Geneva office of Human Rights Watch, and Mitra Kutub, human rights activist from Afghanistan. First, maybe I would like to invite Hilary to share a little bit about the work that's going around, the work that's been done in Geneva, especially to promote accountability. This has been a long-standing call from Afghan civil society and international civil society, especially since the return of Taliban in 2021. The Council has not responded so far to this call, although the Council has set up many mechanisms. The need for a complementary international accountability mechanism still remains, and civil society, both Afghan and international civil society, has been doing a lot of work in Geneva to calling for the establishment of this mechanism by the Human Rights Council. And Hillary, we're very pleased to have Hillary with us. It's been one of the leading voices amongst international civil society in calling for this mechanism. Can you talk a little bit about the work that's going on and what we are actually asking for?
Sure, thanks, Adam, and thank you to the organizers for having me. I'm really honored to be here. I was sad not to be able to make the whole day, but glad to be with you now, and really honored to speak alongside such incredible panelists and activists. And I suppose really our job on this panel is to reflect on the clear appeal from the speaker on the previous panel on the need for more than words and sympathy, the need for concrete action to support access to justice and advance accountability. And I think what's been quite striking here at the Human Rights Council is that despite the egregious abuses, international crimes that are very well documented and ongoing, the Human Rights Council has not used all the tools in its toolkit. The Special Rapporteur has talked about the need for an all-tools approach. The tool that we are pushing the Human Rights Council to use, and I should be clear, you mentioned Human Rights Watch is an international partner, but this is very much an appeal that has been led by Afghan organizations, human rights defenders, is for an international accountability mechanism on Afghanistan, in addition to and in complement to the vital work of the Special Rapporteur. And just, I think it's always important to note, particularly as we go into the session where the rapporteur's mandate's renewed, that mandate remains essential, including the specific reporting on crimes committed against women and girls, and that really important space at the Human Rights Council on that issue in June. In terms of the accountability mechanism that the Civil Society Coalition has been calling for since 2021, and this was, this appeal was renewed last week with a letter supported by over 100 organizations, mainly Afghan organizations, many international organizations as well. Calling for a specific mechanism essentially focused on criminal investigations. So documenting, collecting, preserving, consolidating, analyzing evidence of crimes to support prosecutions, whether that be by the ICC, through universal jurisdiction, whether that be support for potential cases at the ICJ, whether that evidence one day be used for transitional justice or justice within Afghanistan when the conditions are right. This is a mechanism that we have on Syria, we have on Myanmar, and to different degrees, we have elements of it in other situations. And we believe strongly that such a mechanism could have an impact. It's just one tool, but it would be able to support all avenues to justice. It could also have a really important deterrent effect. So we're hoping to see action on this council session. It's one of the key questions, I think, for the Human Rights Council and for the EU, who's expected to present the resolution in the next week or so. I just want to touch on two issues. One is the mandate, the scope. And the other is the creation of this mandate in the context of the UN financial crisis, because these seem to be the two questions that we're faced every single time we talk to decision makers on this. In terms of the mandate itself, I've talked a little bit about what we hope it would and could do. But just to emphasize, this is very much distinct to traditional human rights fact-finding, reporting. It's very distinct but complementary to the work of the Special Rapporteur, the work of the office, and refer you to the joint civil society paper on this and exactly how that work is distinct. I think that's really important to note. We're calling for an independent mechanism. The scope is also important. We are calling for a comprehensive mechanism that would be able to look at past and ongoing abuses, and that element is very important. Of course, any mandate would have limited resources, would be required to prioritize, but not shutting that off is important to the credibility of the mechanism. On the financial crisis, and I raise this because it is coming up in every single discussion on this, and it's sort of the new counter to the proposal. We recognize the UN financial crisis is very real. We recognize that, anything the Council does this session, states are going to need to be mindful of the crisis. But we are saying there is money in the system. This is a question of prioritization. And we think that this work should be prioritized. There are ways we think, and we're happy to discuss with delegations, how to create efficiencies, how to reduce costs, recognizing that maybe this mechanism would take longer to start up, but that, to see this as a real investment in Afghanistan's future, and as something that cannot wait. We've looked at options. We've had scoping reports on accountability. Last year, the Human Rights Council recognized the need to move forward on this. So now, our coalition is really asking for the Council to take that action forward on this. So I'll leave it there, but happy to answer any questions that might be helpful.
Thanks, Hilary. I think this session provides an important window of opportunity that we cannot miss once again in this work. I also realized I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. My name is Adam. I work with Forum Asia, and we are very pleased to work with Shahmama to do whatever little we could to support the organization of this event. And thank you, Soraya and Shahmama, for organizing this important discussion at this very timely, at this time just before the session. And I would now like to invite Mira Kutub, a human rights defender from Afghanistan, to reflect on, as a human rights defender and an activist, how do you see the importance of international solidarity with Afghan women's movement, and what forms of support are most effective for those continuing their struggle inside Afghanistan?
Thanks, Adam. I realized, oh yeah, you can hear me. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks to Shahmama and co-sponsors for organizing this conference. I know it's we're getting towards the end of today, and everyone must be tired, but I'll try to be very precise and very I wouldn't take much of your time. So I think international solidarity is essential for Afghan women because it ensures their struggles are neither silenced nor forgotten. Women inside Afghanistan risk their lives to raise their voices and continue their activism under repression. They face surveillance, they face restrictions and daily threats to their safety, as highlighted by my colleagues during the discussions this afternoon. The Taliban's restrictions have led to complete erasure of women from public lives and even from the online spaces, because women don't feel safe online anymore as well. And you have seen lots of reports of how women had to obscure their faces and their identities while even during the online protests and indoor protests. The protests from outdoors have moved to indoors. Like in 2024, 94% of women's protests took place indoors, and with women covering their faces, fearing persecution. So, but we see also that the authorities have got those tools to identify these dissent voices and detain them and arrest them. And then we all know the reports about detentions and torture of women activists. So this is only a glimpse of what's happening in the country. In such an environment, I believe sustained global attention provides moral support and political pressure for women of Afghanistan, in favor of women of Afghanistan. And it sends a clear message to the world that women are not abandoned and their rights remain firmly on the international agenda. And I think solidarity must go beyond symbolic gestures, and there must be some meaningful support. These can include like amplifying women's voices and creating spaces for them to speak and to ensure that their perspectives and demands are represented in international forums. Women have to be included in all policy discussions or in any discussions about the future of Afghanistan. They should have meaningful participation and leadership roles in any discussions about the future of Afghanistan. Also, funding is very important. Funding women-led organizations is key because they are at the forefront of efforts to deliver education, healthcare, and economic opportunities under all these difficult circumstances that we all know. And especially at this time, this is very urgent because of the US and all other countries have suspended international aid. This has left a massive funding vacuum, and millions of people, especially women and girls, children, displaced people, and vulnerable groups, they all now lack access to life-saving assistance. This has deepened the country's humanitarian crisis, as well as increased gender-based violence, because over 200 protection service points supporting survivors of GBV are no longer operational in the country because of the funding cuts. So I think this is time for the international actors to prevent further catastrophe from happening. We've all seen how the recent earthquake is unfolding to a tragedy with women as serious victims of this natural disaster, all because the Taliban are not allowing female aid workers to support women who have been affected by the natural disaster. And we also saw in the news that pregnant women actually died because the Taliban did not allow volunteer midwives to go from Nangarhar province to Kunar to support them. This is really I think provocative for us as women from Afghanistan, and see that the world might just be watching without any support to the women. And then the world should also consider expanding remote education and work opportunities for women and girls, because currently 78% of Afghan women are not in education and employment or training. And this figure might change, because I just took it from the UN Women report. This figure might change in a couple of years if we don't move and we don't act. So now the digital spaces offer a last resort and the lifeline for Afghan women and girls. This will help them to overcome the barriers imposed by extreme restrictions. Governments, international organizations, and private sector can play a very important role in expanding access to secure and more affordable digital tools that enable women of Afghanistan to connect with the outside world. Also, again, supporting and advocating for an independent and investigative mechanism for Afghanistan to collect, preserve, and analyze evidence of serious human rights violations is very vital, and it will ensure that these analyzed cases can be used in national and international prosecution, including before the ICC and the ICJ. Strengthening the documentation efforts is also is one of the key or effective ways to support women of Afghanistan, and promoting collaboration among organizations documenting human rights abuses, ideally through maybe a central archive of cases of HRVs to avoid duplicated efforts. And these can be used again for accountability mechanisms. So I think overall, this is a moral imperative and a shared responsibility for governments worldwide to stand in solidarity with women of Afghanistan. The future of Afghanistan and the hope for a just and peaceful world depends on it, because things happening inside the territory of Afghanistan is not going to remain within those territories. It will eventually affect the region and then the world. So true solidarity, I think, means standing with women of Afghanistan in the long term, amplifying their voices, supporting their agency, and also recognizing them as a leader of their own struggles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also, especially highlighting the impact of funding cuts on the ground, especially for women and girls in Afghanistan. We have some time for questions, so the floor is open for any questions, comments. I know it's been a very long day, but yes, please. Thank you.
Yes. No, some general comments more than for all the panel. First of all, joins the condolences expresses in this room to the people of Afghanistan for the tragic earthquake that has struck the country. Chile has a lot of experience with earthquake, and we know the devastation that can be produced. We wish a swift recovery for the victims and their families who are already enduring profound hardship. We also wish to note that Chile is honored to co-sponsor this important event. By doing so, we affirm not only our solidarity with Afghan women and girls, but also our conviction that their voices must remain at the center of our deliberation in Geneva. The testimonies shared today, and I wish to especially thank Shahmama for her moving representation and for all the distinguished panelists, and of course, Richard, for your tremendous intervention. Remind us that the situation in Afghanistan is not an abstract debate, but a lived reality of exclusion, fear, and resilience. Girls forbidden for attending the school, women barred for work, families mourning in silence. These are not isolated violations, they are part of a systemic policy of pressure. We know that faced with reality, the Human Rights Council has a responsibility to act. We all agree on this. Yet we are equality conscious of the severe liquidity crisis affecting our work and the UN system as a whole. This is a challenge that we must face together. Chile believes that the path forward lies in maximizing the impact of every scarce resource through cooperation, coordination, and dialogue. Accountability is the cornerstone of justice. Without it, cycles of violence will persist and the oppressors will be emboldened. In this context, we strongly support that the Human Rights Council advance in the discussion regarding the creation of accountability mandate on Afghanistan. Such a mandate or such in any way they can form, even if it's the creation of a new mandate or empowering the procedures that Human Rights Council already has, must be robust but realistic, designed to document violation, preserve evidence, and open avenues for justice, while complementing and not duplicating existing mechanisms. In times of scarcity, efficiency and synergy are imperative for all of us. Chile stands ready to work constructively with all delegations and, of course, with Afghan human rights defenders to ensure that this council response is both principled and effective. Afghan women and girls deserve nothing less. In this context, Chile commenced the initiative by Australia, Canada, Germany, and the Netherlands under Article 29 of CEDAW to hold Afghanistan accountable for its violations. Such measure must be supported and amplified globally. As you know, last November, the government of Chile, Costa Rica, Spain, France, Luxembourg, and Mexico have submitted a referral of the situation in the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan to the Prosecutor's Office on the International Criminal Court, considering the worsening condition and the seriousness of the situation of all Afghan women and girls. Since it's appeared that one or more crimes have been committed within the jurisdiction of the court, the aforementioned states parties have requested the prosecutor to consider the crimes committed against women and girls after the Taliban took power in 2021 within their investigation into the situation in the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, with the purpose of determining whether one or more specific persons should be charged with the commission of these crimes. But also, this is I'm mentioning it because Chile has a strong commitment with Afghan women and girls, and we have worked with UN Women and other organs, and already we have Afghan women and Afghan families as a refugee in Chile. And the President Boric has been shown a very strong commitment, because he's always saying that the human rights violation has to be condemned wherever country committed that violation. And I want to make a huge thanks for this organization of this amazing conversation. It's for us, for all of us, activists, civil society, and state delegates, to enlighten how we can, which is the path we have to follow to enrich the discussion within the Human Rights Council and other mechanisms also. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chile, for those comments and for your continuous support to Afghan women and girls and human rights defenders in general. And in addition to your many initiatives at the international level to promote accountability, Chile was also one of the signatories of the joint statement earlier this year at the Human Rights Council, supporting and amplifying the calls by Afghan civil society for the establishment of an independent accountability mechanism. Thank you. If not, maybe I'll ask the panelists if you have any last words before we conclude.
Well, I wouldn't have much, but thank you so much for being here today and for expressing your support to the women of Afghanistan. And I think that lots of the discussions today, I know you've had before, but this is the point about amplifying women's voices who do not have the means, who are inside the country, who live in those small villages, and they don't have the means to raise their voices. So it is very important for us, and I think it is a moral responsibility for all of us to be their voices and to support them in any way we can. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, I can only agree, and really thanks to fellow panelists, to Shahmama for organizing this conversation. I think it's really important to have had this conversation before things get so hectic next week and delegations are focusing on everything. But to really, I think it's what's come through to me is just the appeal to take the concrete steps that we can take and do everything we can. So I hope delegations will focus on that throughout the negotiations and seek the views of Afghan defenders, particularly women and girls who are here for the session, reaching out to you and to input into that resolution and into the negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you. I think with that, we can close this panel. But before we end the panel, I also would like, on behalf of Forum Asia, thank Shahmama for the opportunity to co-sponsor and support this event. And also on behalf of all the organizers, thank all the delegations who are here. I think your presence shows the level of interest in discussions around the situation of human rights in Afghanistan. And yeah, I think with that, I'll close this panel and invite Dr. Farkhunda Akbar to deliver some closing remarks and some takeaways from today's discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon again. Thanks everyone for a great panel. I really enjoyed, especially the solidarity. I think that's where our hope really lies. I'm not gonna take much of your time. I think there has been many recommendations made today, some concrete one, long-term and short-term. I just wanna mention a few of them and put in, and I'm sorry if I missed anything particular, but after 4 years of the Taliban rule, if today, as we came here in the last 4 hours, speak and heard so many diverse voices, experts, testimonies, and there has been a cohesion in agreement that Afghan women remain at the heart of resistance against the Taliban rule in Afghanistan. But they are also at the sharpest edge of repression, considering the complexities of gender repression against them. And we also heard today that solidarity alone is not enough. Afghan women are asking for action. This has been repeated over and over by all speakers. And this means we need justice, accountability, and meaningful inclusion of anything to do with Afghanistan. And in this action, we also heard that legal action by itself is not enough, but concrete action on how to help and support Afghan women and girls, providing practical support such as scholarship, such as a pathway for resettlement, or bringing people who are really women human rights defenders who are really in danger. And this also means providing employment for Afghan women at any capacities that we could identify and find the avenue for them. And documentation must be, we had many forms of it from different perspective as a key issues for holding the Taliban accountable, but documentation must be trauma informed. It must be intersectional to consider different experiences of the diverse Afghan women from all parts of Afghanistan, different ethnic group, language barriers, language diversities, and also geography. And that documentation is not without consequences. We need to be aware of it, and documentation is also comes with risk if it's neutralized, and it needs to be understood in a broader political context. And next point is the international community must use all existing accountability tools legally. I mean, you have ICC, initiative ICJ, the Human Rights Council, but push for independent mechanism in codifying gender apartheid, and also the discussion that is going to happen next week about a comprehensive accountability mechanism that we are advocating for. And next, politically, I mean, the legal avenues are great, maybe long term, but politically, engagement with the Taliban must be benchmarked against human rights. Otherwise, it is legitimizing oppression. And we need to look at how our countries, particularly our member states, are engaging with the Taliban. Who are the people who do talk to the Taliban, our diplomats, whether there are any women in that room that talks to the Taliban. I think those are very, very important one in a short term, because diplomacy do send a very strong signal to the regime in power, but also to the Afghan woman, Afghan woman operating or looking at what we do gain from this diplomatic engagement. And we must bridge the humanitarian and human rights agendas together. So we have to understand that the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan is happening. It's a man-made humanitarian crisis happening in a political crisis and a human rights crisis. And there needs to be a bridge with it. And in terms of how do we understand humanitarian crisis when there is a human rights violation happening in the country, considering the marginalization of ethnic group and the woman, especially the health crisis. There's a lot of cases of sexual violence against women and girls, and humanitarian organizations are operating in a neutral way without considering the political aspect of it, that they're operating in a gender apartheid system. I think these are really, really important for us to look in how these programs and these initiatives are unfolding inside Afghanistan, which is like really, really political. Afghan women must be in the room, shaping decisions about their future, but not spoken about them. We are many, like any woman from any part of, if you go back and look at all wars, there is not a single voice that you say that there has to be one voice for the women of the country. Women have political agency. Women is just like men. Women's voices are diverse. They have different needs. So we really ask that consider that Afghan women have different needs, different voices, and we need to listen to every one of them, but does not mean that you delegitimize other voices. So please have that diversity of our voices in your mind. And global solidarity must go beyond words. Panel just before, increase funding for human rights defenders, independent media, local organizations that are documenting abuses, who are often are at great risk. We do know Rukhsana Media was here, but there are other local media organizations that are still 4 years on operating despite the risk, but they are facing critical lack of funding. They are there. They are, as Zahra told, that this woman, they do protests in their home, they record, and she has to walk 2 hours to a mountain to have signal and send that video or that photo to us. And these very people are facing the very cut on the funding. So the least we could do is support any kind of civil society that are still operating in the country, because that is reaching the people on the ground. And by connecting to this civil society group, you're diverging the Taliban, so you're working around it. And the message from this conference is very clear: accountability is possible, action is urgent, and Afghan women must remain at the front and center. Thank you very much.
It's the end of the meeting today, right? Can we take a moment to appreciate Shahmama and Soraya for putting this together?
We really appreciate to see that this much widespread support and global solidarity with the women of Afghanistan. So advocacy is a process. We need to keep working. We need to keep continuing working, but we really need your support and the continuation of your solidarity as well. Thank you so much.